Okay, just showing you a quick video in regards to installing a Wilwood brake kit on your Ford 9-inch. This particular 9-inch came out of a 1970 F100. It was geared with 350 gears. This third member that I put in is a nodular iron third member from Strange Engineering. It has 410 gearing, a locker, a Detroit locker that is, so you can still corner and whatnot. It's got a 1350 style billet yoke down there, billet steel. And I just wanted to give you a quick couple of tips. Wilwood does a good job describing what you need to do to put this kit together. I'm running Quick Performance custom 30-inch shafts, the 31 spline. This is the parking brake setup for Wilwood. And I usually put just a tiny bit of Never Sees right around this ring where this bearing seats. If you've had one of these trucks for a long time, you'll see that the bearing can get kind of seized in there in that collar and doesn't come out easily. I have gone ahead and replaced the seals in there. Seals are new. Just put, like I said, a very fine amount of Never Sees on that inside collar right along this rim. That way it has a better chance of sealing. And a lot of people online, especially YouTube and some of the forums, claim you don't need these gaskets. This particular part number is Felpro 55036. It is for a Ford 9-inch from 1970 and 1990 with half-inch studs. They have a different part number for those with 3/8 studs. Well, these on these 70s trucks are all half-inch studs from what I've found in my experience. Anyways, just wanted to show you, I've replaced the seals. I have these gasket flanges, and these, you can see that Felpro gasket will go right, but it goes right up against this. And all it does, it's not even really a gasket. It's a dust protector. It keeps grime and crap out of this collar, because trying to remove this bearing when there's been grime and crap in there and water, and it is a pain in the butt to get that thing out. It really does seize in there. That's why I put a little bit of Never Sees. I use this dust collector, which sits nice and tight against that bearing, and then the backing plate goes. So essentially, axle, the Felpro dust seal, then the backing plate. I guess I did that wrong. Backing plate from the axle, then put the dust seal on. Then you can slide this thing in there and get everything bolted up. I'm not going to film putting this all back together. I will film some of the tricks that I've learned along the way in getting these Wilwood. Now, one thing of note, I'm using Quick Performance axles. These are custom axles, 31 spline, as I said, 30-inch long, because that's what it was with the third member in here. I did a measurement of what I pulled out, and that's what I'm putting in. These axles are spectacular performance axles, and you must have the hole there for putting in the Wilwood backing plate with the retainer plates, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to put this together. So if you have to custom order axles like I did, make sure you get that hole cut for installing the flange and the bolts on here. Yeah, I'll touch base here in a second. Okay, I'm back. So I just barely slid in this axle, and I don't have it flush in there. You can kind of see inside there, right there. The bearing is kind of sticking out a little, and that's fine. This retainer plate has a lip, and it says in the instructions this lip needs to go towards the bearing to push it in. And here's the other a little caveat. So this will slide in just like that. And that's another reason why I didn't push that all the way in, because you need a little space. There's not a lot of space right here. So when I slide this all the way in, that retainer plate, there's just no room to put it in between here. So I have to leave this out just a little bit, and now I can slide that back in. But there's another good reason to have that Felpro axle seal, which is essentially a dust collector, as I stated, is it gives you distance, a space between here, this backing plate, and here. So when that retainer, the axle retainer plate goes up from Wilwood, and that lips on the inside, it pushes the bearing all the way in. Without that gasket, that tiny little gasket, this has a little bit of play. That bearing doesn't seat all the way in. And if that has a little bit of play as you're cornering, this rotor is pulling in and out of that caliper, and you don't want that. So that tiny little gasket does provide the exact measurement you need so that there is no play in that axle against that bearing and retainer plate. And that's what the desired outcome is. And so I'm going to go ahead and pause here for a little bit. I'm going to get this retainer plate in. I'm going to use this hole to put all the 4 nuts in, and I'll torque them, and then I'll capture you again. Another thing you have to do is, Wilwood says you can do this afterwards if you want. There's this little sight glass, just like a typical drum brake right there, this piece of rubber you can pull out to adjust the parking brake. I did it beforehand. So I unscrewed that notch just like a typical drum brake right there. Right there. I did it beforehand so that the rotor, it doesn't ride on these, but this is pretty dang close to riding against the rotor. So if I do have to make an adjustment to make sure the parking brake stops, it will be a very fine adjustment instead of having to turn this thing. 9 turns is what I had to do to get these shoes rubbing against the inside of that rotor. All right, I'll be back in a short bit. Okay, one more tip. These nuts that you have that go in here, sometimes before these T-bolts are sucked all the way in and they're not, all the way tight. This is still not torqued down, but it is in there. All 4 nuts are holding it with the T-bolts. Anyways, a little trick. Stuff a little paper towel or another nut inside there first. This is not a deep socket, but it is, a fairly big one. It's a 3/4 inch. Anyways, I stuff a little paper towel so that keeps the nut up closer to this edge, because there's not a lot of T-bolt sticking through on the inside right there. And so the nut will never engage. You'll just sit and spin because that nut is too far deep. So put a little paper towel or something, or another nut or a washer or something inside there. Keep that nut flush against this side so you can get those threads engaged. Then you can do all the torquing. And it's just snug. It's not torqued yet. But that's just another trick. This thing, you can see the gasket is right up there. See it right there, that little hairline gasket inside there against the axle flange and the backing plate. And as soon as I torque this down, this offset here, this little gap, between going all the way into the third member and then sliding out, it's perfectly tight, which is good for what I plan to do with this truck, is do some autocross or just, a fun cornering truck with the QA1 suspension. All right, I'll capture you in just a moment. Okay, I just finished tightening up the 4 T-bolt nuts, and those are lock nuts. So as you tighten, they kind of bind against the threads so they don't back out easy. I put a tiny little bit of red Loctite on the T-bolts before I slid this all together. And so those are the things you definitely need, is some red Loctite, and Wilwood specifies this as well, to put on the caliper bolts right here, which go back right there. You can see them. Anyways, And then here is some of the paste I use for the Wilwood. It's this thread sealant. It's the PTFE. It's good for oil and brake and gas and hydraulic fluid as well. Anyways, what it allows to do is seal the little 1/8 inch by 27 threaded -3 port on the caliper itself, which is right here. You can see it right there. And then you can see the brake pads are in there. The caliper is all centered. Anyways, just going to finish this one up. There are spacers to go between here and the caliper. And the bolt threads through them. And that allows for the caliper to be center right here in the rotor. And I'll show you that here in just a second. Okay, so I just put this caliper in. And I put some bolts. I put the 2 bolts in right there. And you can see right between there, there's some gold shims. I started with 2. And then you just kind of torque it. You don't have to go too crazy. Again, I'll show you right here. You can see the gold shims right there. And you just kind of torque this a little bit. You don't have to get too crazy, but you need it at least snug against this bracket here so that there's no play in that caliper. Now you can look down here and determine what your spacing looks like. Now I started with 2 shims because that's what I did on the other side. So you can see there's that spacing there, then there's that spacing there. And that should be equal. If it's not, you got a problem. You have a mismatch and you need to get put spacers in or take some away. So this is looking good with 2 spacers. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this up here in a second. Sorry for the camera work. I apologize. My son was gonna help me, but ended up going to play some tennis. So anyways, that's one thing you got to do is get that spacing right so then the pads will slid in. And so that how this works, instead of this caliper, like a traditional caliper that a lot of ones do, at least with the old calipers, they would slide on pins back and forth. So as far as the centering wasn't perfect, it was okay. This doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be pretty darn close. It has to be equal spacing between these 2 sides of this rotor, because these rotors don't move once they're tight. The pistons come in and out, and there's 4, and they squeeze this rotor. So if it's not centered, one brake pad hits before the other, and it's just not ideal. Anyways, so I just wanted to show you that real quick. Wilwood covers this in their instructions. It's very clear. It's pretty simple. It's definitely not rocket science. But one thing you definitely want to do before you put your caliper on, or especially before you put your pads on, is clean this rotor surface. I went ahead and cleaned the inside where the parking brake will ride again. The shoes will ride against the inside. I cleaned all these surfaces inside and out. And this is ready to do the final assembly. So I'll touch base with you in just a second and show you the finished product with the pads installed. Okay, as I mentioned, between these spacers, those shims that Wilwood provides, you need to, once you get the centering done and you know how many shims you need, loosen this again, pull it back, put some red Loctite on the threads. I did one at a time and then tighten this down. And the spacing is right on. So, and I have a pair of calipers that I use just to get this dead set, and it's looking good. You can see if I kind of pan. Now, these brake pads, we will slide them in. So, it should just slide all the way in, and Boom. So there we go. And then this little cotter pin goes in here. And then you just flare it out or swedge it out, however you want to say it. And then this is done. I torqued these bolts. Everything's been torqued. And I used lug nuts to keep this rotor tight against the axle flange. And if you do that, well then this won't move, and it gives you a better chance of getting this centered as it should be. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I apologize for the camera work. I do this by myself. I do not do this channel for money. I do not have enough subscribers to even consider that. All I do this for is just to show some tips and tricks. This is not necessarily a know-how to, exactly install video, but this is what I did to get this Wilwood kit installed, and I'm excited. It's getting close. This rear axle assembly is essentially done. I've got some QA1 brackets that go here, and these little bevels that I showed in the last video. Anyways, this has to, the bracket will go through here. The coilover will mount to this. I cut the original shock brackets off this Ford 9-inch, so this thing is ready to put together for a QA1 kit. The rear is a 12.88 rotor, 4-piston in the back. The front is a 6-piston, 12.88 rotor as well. So it should stop incredibly fast, especially for a short bed F100 with a Coyote in it. Anyways, just wanted to show you how this is done. Quick Performance is a spectacular build company. I got my nodular iron Strange case, fully assembled third member or center section as they call it, with the 1350 series steel billet steel yoke. This came directly from them with a Detroit Locker. I went with a Detroit because when you gun it, I want both tires no matter what. I don't want them to be reliant on clutches, nothing. I want them to lock, and then when you corner, it'll disengage. Now, obviously, with Detroit Lockers, as you corner, you want to take your foot off the gas just a little so it can unlock as you're cornering fast, because as soon as you give it gas, it'll lock again, and it'll want to drive you as straight as possible. Anyways, I'm a big fan of Detroit Lockers. I've been using them for eons, and I love them. I have them in my Ford Bronco, front and rear. I have them in my Sand Racer, which is my 1973 F100 that I run on the sand dunes in Oregon. Lockers are awesome. That being said, daily driver stuff, elliptical gears is the way to go, in my opinion. That way you don't have to worry about locking around corners. You don't have to worry about the locker steering you straight. It's better on ice. It's just it'll find the traction as it needs. But in my opinion, if you're running a performance vehicle and you want traction, Detroit's the way to go. All right, cheers. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Go ahead and tell your friends about it if they need to know some more things about Ford 9-inch. They're easy to work on. I love working Ford 9-inch. They're pretty much bulletproof, up to 1,000 horsepower or more if you get strengthened case like nodular iron and so forth, like what I've done. Anyways, enjoy.